Stop everything. What we are witnessing has never unfolded like this before. In the last 24 hours, something absolutely extraordinary just happened, sending shock waves through the corridors of power in Washington. Powerful forces have just moved against a former president who's clawing his way back into the spotlight. And by the end of this unfolding drama, the situation will look irreversible. This just happened. Pentagon officials have distanced themselves as Trump makes demands. The military draws a line. Tonight, we begin unpacking this seismic shift where the guardians of America's might are saying no more to a figure who's long tested the boundaries of authority. The Pentagon has just taken an extreme action. The target, Donald J. Trump, the man who's never shied away from pushing the envelope on military loyalty and national security directives, triggered by a refusal to comply with what sources describe as unprecedented demands from Trump's camp. Demands that reportedly include mobilizing resources for what insiders call politically motivated operations. Decision made behind closed doors in an emergency session at the Pentagon's E-Ring, where top brass convened in a late-night meeting that stretched into the early hours. Timeline this morning, with statements leaking out just minutes ago, confirming that high-ranking officials are publicly and privately drawing a firm line against any involvement in Trump's latest maneuvers. This isn't some vague memo or off-their-chord whisper. It's a full-throated distancing with spokespeople from the Department of Defense issuing carefully worded but unmistakable rebukes. The U.S. military serves the Constitution, not any individual, one official stated flatly, echoing sentiments that have been building since Trump's post-2024 election rhetoric escalated. Sources close to the Joint Chiefs tell us that Trump's demands centered around deploying assets for border security enhancements that blurred the lines between domestic law enforcement and military intervention. Demands that harken back to his first term's controversies, but now amplified in a hyper-polarized 2026 landscape. The refusal came swift and coordinated, with generals who've previously navigated Trump's orbit now prioritizing institutional integrity over personal allegiance. As the news broke, the White House, under current president, but let's assume a scenario where Trump's influence looms large post-election, scrambled to respond. But the Pentagon's move has already rippled outward. Trump's team fired back on social media with the former president himself posting a fiery thread on X, calling it a betrayal by deep state bureaucrats who hate America. But the military's line drawing isn't isolated. It's part of a broader cascade that's pulling in other institutions. This morning's developments have triggered whispers in Capitol Hill hallways where even some GOP stalwarts are pausing before leaping to Trump's defense. This is not routine procedure, folks. This is not standard political conflict. This only happens when confidence in a leader's judgment collapses entirely. Institutional behavior now indicates a loss of patience, a shift to enforcement mode, and perhaps even preparation for force if things escalate further. The Pentagon, historically apolitical, doesn't make such public stands lightly. Remember, the last time we saw anything remotely similar was during the 2020 Lafayette Square incident, but this feels more definitive, more like a firewall being erected against potential overreach. Insiders describe the atmosphere inside the Pentagon as tense but resolute. There's a sense that lines must be held now before demands turn into orders that could compromise missions worldwide. One anonymous source shared this signal is unprecedented because it comes amid Trump's ongoing legal battles and his vocal promises of retribution if he regains power. The military's distancing suggests they see the writing on the wall. Trump's demands aren't just policy proposals. They're tests of loyalty that could drag the armed forces into partisan quagmires from domestic unrest to international flashpoints. As we dive deeper, consider the triggered by aspect, that refusal. Reports indicate Trump's camp approached mid-level officers informally first, seeking commitments on everything from equipment loans to intelligence sharing for what they framed as national emergency preparedness. When rebuffed, the demands escalated to direct calls to Secretary of Defense, name, who convened the emergency session. The decision, a blanket policy reaffirmation, no engagement without clear constitutional backing. This morning's press briefing made it official, with the DoD spokesperson emphasizing, "Our allegiance is to the chain of command under the current administration guided by law." The timeline accelerates from here. Just hours ago, Trump's allies in Congress began mobilizing with figures like Senator Name tweeting support. But notably, key military veterans in the GOP ranks stayed silent. This breaking event isn't just about one refusal. It's the spark that could ignite a larger confrontation between executive ambitions and institutional safeguards. Former allies are no longer defending Trump with the fervor we've come to expect. Party leaders and insiders once vocal in their support are hedging their bets as the Pentagon's stance reverberates. Silence from key names like General Retired Name and groups such as the Veterans Affairs Committee speaks volumes. Private reactions are described as panic among Trump's inner circle, with distancing maneuvers and damage control kicking into high gear. Public loyalty is being replaced by caution, quiet exits from advisory roles, and statements that emphasize respect for institutions over blind allegiance. Political meaning: they see what is coming. The writings on the wall, Trump's demands, framed as necessary for America First policies, are now viewed as liabilities that could tarnish the entire conservative movement. One GOP senator, speaking off the record, confided, "We can't afford another January 6th-style fallout, especially with midterms looming." This betrayal isn't overt sabotage. It's a subtle shift, like rats sensing a sinking ship. Insiders report hushed conversations in Mar-a-Lago circles where even die-hard supporters are whispering about contingency plans if the military's line holds firm. This turning point dovetails with the second title's explosive angle: breaking explosive Senate mutiny. Trump betrayed by GOP insiders plunging Capitol into anarchy. Yes, the Pentagon's move has spilled over into the legislative branch, where a mutiny is brewing among Republican senators who've long been Trump's bulwark. Triggered by the same demands that irked the military, calls for Senate-backed resolutions to pressure the DoD into compliance, a faction of GOP insiders is now openly rebelling. This morning, in a closed-D door or caucus meeting, voices like Senator Nah argued against blindly following Trump's lead, citing risks to national security and party unity. The anarchy in Capitol Hill is palpable. Shouts echoed through the chambers as pro-Trump loyalists clashed with moderates, leading to an abrupt adjournment. "This is mutiny," one Trump ally bellowed. But the betrayals are stacking up. Key figures, including those who've benefited from Trump's endorsements, are distancing themselves, issuing statements that praise his vision while underscoring the need for checks and balances. Private emails leaked to the press reveal panic. "We can't let this drag us down." Time for damage control. This action activates enforcement mechanisms that could snowball rapidly. Possible outcomes now include contempt proceedings if Trump pushes further, potential seizure or freeze of assets tied to his demands, and even arrest warrants if classified information mishandling is alleged. Removal processes for any complicit officials are on the table, setting up a constitutional showdown. One move now forces the next through legal obligations and automatic triggers like mandatory reporting to oversight committees. The cascade begins with the Pentagon's formal report to Congress, due by end of day, detailing the refused demands. This could trigger hearings under the National Defense Authorization Act, pulling in the Senate Armed Services Committee, where the mutiny is already festering. If Trump counters with executive-style orders through surrogates, it activates judicial review, potentially landing in the Supreme Court's lap amid their packed docket on executive powers. Behind the scenes, lawyers are scrambling. Trump's legal team is prepping emergency filings to challenge the DoD's stance as insubordination, but experts predict slim chances given recent rulings on military autonomy. The power cascade is relentless. Refusal leads to documentation, which leads to investigations, which could expose broader networks of influence peddling. Institutions are acting in coordination with speed and silence that belies the chaos. This suggests a belief that Trump's resistance is weakening, perhaps due to ongoing probes into his finances and associations. Strategy phase containment to prevent spillover, isolation of his demands from mainstream policy, and damage limiting to safeguard alliances. Objective: control the narrative before Trump's media machine spins it as a deep state coup. Prevent escape routes like rallying public support and lock positions to ensure no backsliding. Sources indicate interagency huddles involving the NSA and FBI monitoring for any escalation in communications from Trump's camp. The silence is strategic. No leaks beyond what's necessary to signal resolve. This read points to a unified front. The system is self-correcting, viewing Trump's demands as a threat to stability in a volatile global arena. As the day unfolds, expect public defiance statements from Trump, perhaps a rally announcement or Fox News appearance. Emergency filings are already in motion, with his lawyers petitioning federal courts. Counter orders from sympathetic governors could test state-federal divides, while global reactions trickle in from allies wary of U.S. unpredictability. The situation is accelerating at breakneck speed. Expect a barrage of public defiance statements from Trump and his inner circle within the next few hours. He's already signaled a major Truth Social live ream scheduled for tonight, where he plans to expose the traitors in uniform and on the Hill. Emergency filings are pouring into federal courts. Trump's legal team just submitted a motion for a temporary restraining order against the Pentagon's unlawful refusal to execute lawful directives, claiming executive privilege extends to post-presidency influence in national security matters. Counter-orders are emerging from sympathetic red state governors who are issuing state-level emergency declarations that could attempt to bypass federal military command structures for border-related operations. Global reactions are beginning to flood in. NATO headquarters in Brussels issued a carefully worded statement reaffirming confidence in the resilience of American democratic institutions. But behind closed doors, European allies are privately expressing alarm over potential instability in U.S. command and control. Chinese state media has already seized the moment, running headlines about American military rebellion against its own leader. While Russian outlets amplify the chaos narrative to portray U.S. leadership as fractured, markets are reacting nervously. Defense stocks dipped 2.3% in after-hours trading as investors weigh the possibility of prolonged political paralysis affecting procurement and readiness. The power struggle has decisively shifted from politics, enforcement, rhetoric, mechanism, loyalty, survival. What began as policy disagreements over resource allocation has morphed into a direct test of whether civilian leadership can compel institutional obedience when the institutions themselves perceive a constitutional threat. Trump's camp is leaning hard into the defiance playbook. Surrogates are flooding cable news with accusations of a silent coup by generals and rhino senators. Yet the military's posture remains steely. Additional DoD briefings this afternoon reiterated that any attempt to circumvent the chain of command through unofficial channels will be treated as a security breach. On Capitol Hill, the anarchy is deepening. The Senate mutiny has fractured along generational and ideological lines. Veteran senators who served during Trump's first term are now openly coordinating with moderate Democrats to draft a rare bipartisan resolution, reaffirming civilian control of the military while upholding constitutional norms. Pro-Trump hardliners responded by walking out of committee meetings, vowing to block all unrelated legislation until loyalty is restored. Fistfights nearly broke out in a House anti-room when staffers from opposing camps clashed over access to a shared printer, symbolic of the deeper breakdown in decorum. Behind the scenes, the escalation is even more intense. Intelligence community sources report heightened monitoring of communications between Trump associates and certain active duty personnel suspected of prior loyalty pledges. The FBI has quietly opened preliminary inquiries into whether any classified material was improperly discussed in the context of the refused demands. Meanwhile, Pentagon cyber teams are on high alert for potential disinformation campaigns designed to erode public trust in the military's stance. This phase is defined by narrowing options. Trump can double down, rally supporters, call for protests, push sympathetic lawmakers to introduce impeachment-style articles against dissenting officials. But each move risks alienating more fence-sitters. The institutions, conversely, appear locked in. Containment has given way to active isolation. Key military bases have increased force protection postures out of an abundance of caution, a phrase that rarely appears without underlying concern. The global systemic stakes are rising by the hour. Allies are quietly repositioning diplomatic cables, preparing contingency plans should US foreign policy become erratic. Financial analysts warn that prolonged uncertainty could trigger a flight to safety in treasuries and gold. While energy markets brace for volatility, if border security rhetoric escalates into actual troop movements without clear authorization. International institutions are now watching with growing unease. NATO has quietly convened an emergency consultation among defense ministers, not because of any external threat, but to assess the ripple effects on alliance cohesion if America's military appears divided against itself. The United Nations Security Council corridors buzz with off-record conversations about whether this moment signals deeper fragility in the posted order the US has long anchored. Key allies, Britain, France, Japan, Australia, have all issued restrained public statements while privately pressing Washington for clarity on command reliability in potential Indo-Pacific contingencies. Credibility damage is already measurable. The US legal system faces scrutiny over whether it can constrain a figure who commands such intense loyalty from millions. Executive authority itself is under microscope. If a former president with massive political capital can be openly defied by career institutions, what precedent does that set for future administrations? Alliances are quietly recalibrating. Some European capitals are accelerating independent defense initiatives, hedging against a scenario where American reliability wavers. Risks now include diplomatic isolation if partners begin treating US commitments with skepticism, market shock if prolonged uncertainty triggers sell-offs in US equities and the dollar, and security repositioning as adversaries probe for weakness. Iran and North Korea have already issued provocative statements framing the moment as proof of American decline. This is no longer a story about one person. This is a test of the system itself. Whether the constitutional architecture built over centuries can withstand sustained pressure from a charismatic leader who views institutions as either allies or obstacles. Outcomes now narrow to three stark paths. Enforcement, in which the military and Congress hold the line through legal and procedural mechanisms. Collapse if loyalty fractures irreparably, and public support surges behind extra-constitutional action or historic confrontation. A full-spectrum clash that could redefine executive power for generations. After this moment, nothing returns to normal. The old assumptions that military loyalty follows the person in the Oval Office unquestioningly, that Senate majorities bend to the will of a dominant faction, that rhetoric alone can bend reality, have been shattered. The situation is now irreversible, accelerating, out of containment. Every hour brings new pressure points. A leaked memo, a defiant tweet, a courtroom ruling, a market tremor, a foreign leader phone call. What began as Trump making demands has become a defining stress test for American democracy in the 21st century. The line has been drawn. The institutions have chosen their side. The question that remains is whether the public and history will ratify that choice, or whether the forces of disruption will prove strong enough to redraw the map entirely.